When my parents retired, they gave the company to my cousin. They said, "She deserves it. More you'll understand." So I smiled and backed off. 2 months later, I brought someone to dinner. My cousin dropped her wine glass when she saw her. I, 32M, stood in my father's study, watching him sign the papers that would transfer ownership of our family's manufacturing business to my cousin. The pen scratched against paper, each stroke feeling like a nail in a coffin I hadn't known was being built. My mother sat beside him, her face serene, as if she were watching him sign a birthday card instead of dismantling everything I'd worked toward for the past decade. My father looked up at me, his expression unreadable. He told me that my cousin deserved the company more than I did, that I would understand eventually. My mother nodded along, adding that it was for the best, that they'd thought about this carefully. I stood there, feeling the weight of those words settle into my bones. 10 years of 70-hour weeks, of learning every aspect of the business from the ground up, of sacrificing relationships and personal time. All of it apparently meant nothing. My cousin sat across from them, barely containing her smile. She thanked them profusely, promising to honor the family legacy. She'd only joined the company 3 years ago, working in marketing while I'd been managing operations, supply chains, client relationships, and basically keeping the entire operation running smoothly. But sure, she deserved it more. I smiled at them. I told them I understood, that I respected their decision. I shook my cousin's hand and congratulated her. My father seemed relieved by my reaction, probably expecting an argument. My mother hugged me, whispering that I was being very mature about this. I hugged her back and told her I just wanted them to be happy in their retirement. That night, I went home to my apartment and sat in the dark for 3 hours. The betrayal burned in my chest, but beneath it was something colder, sharper. I'd spent a decade learning not just our family business, but the entire industry. I knew every supplier, every client, every competitor. I knew where the weaknesses were, where the opportunities hid, where the money actually flowed versus where the books said it flowed. And I knew exactly what my cousin didn't know, which was almost everything that mattered. The next morning, I went to work as usual. My cousin was already redecorating my father's old office, bringing in some designer to make it look more modern. She called a staff meeting to introduce herself as the new owner, talking about fresh perspectives and new directions. I sat in the back and took notes. She wanted to pivot toward digital marketing, to expand into markets we'd deliberately avoided, to restructure our supplier relationships to cut costs. Every idea was terrible. Every single one would either cost us our most loyal clients or destroy our reputation for quality. But I smiled and nodded when she looked my way for approval. After the meeting, she pulled me aside. She told me she was counting on me to help guide her through the transition, that she knew I might be disappointed, but she hoped we could work together. I assured her I was fully committed to supporting her leadership. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth. I gave her 2 weeks of helpful guidance, answering her questions, introducing her to key clients. Then I submitted my resignation. She was shocked. She asked why I was leaving, if it was because of the ownership decision. I told her it wasn't personal, that I'd been thinking about starting my own venture for a while, and this seemed like the right time. My parents called me that evening, concerned. I told them the same thing. I was grateful for everything they'd taught me, but I needed to build something of my own. They seemed to accept this, even if my mother sounded worried. The truth was simpler and more calculated than any of them suspected. I'd spent the previous 2 weeks copying every client list, every supplier contact, every process document, every piece of institutional knowledge that existed outside the official company databases. I'd also reached out quietly to 3 of our senior staff members, people I'd worked with closely for years, people who were as shocked as I was by the ownership decision. I asked if they'd be interested in joining a new venture. All 3 agreed immediately. I used my savings and took out a substantial loan to start my own manufacturing company. We set up shop 15 miles away, close enough to poach clients, but far enough to avoid looking like we were directly competing. I named it something completely different, nothing that would trigger recognition from my family's business name. Then I started making calls. The thing about business relationships is that they're personal. Clients don't stay loyal to company names. They stay loyal to the people who've solved their problems for years. I'd been the one taking their calls at midnight when shipments went wrong, the one finding solutions when suppliers fell through, the one who actually understood their needs. So when I called them to let them know I was starting a new venture and would love to continue working with them, most didn't hesitate. Within 6 weeks, I'd secured contracts with about 40% of my family's, biggest clients. I wasn't poaching aggressively. I was simply making myself available, and they were choosing to follow. My cousin was probably noticing the decline in orders, but likely attributed it to normal business fluctuations. She wouldn't realize what was happening until it was too late. The 3 senior staff members who joined me brought another 20% of the client base with them through their own relationships. We were operating lean, working out of a modest facility, but our overhead was low and our margins were healthy. More importantly, we were building something with the people who actually understood the work. I didn't contact my parents during this time. They'd call occasionally, asking how I was doing, if I'd found a new opportunity. I kept my answers vague. I told them I was consulting, exploring options, taking some time to figure out my next move. They seemed satisfied with this, probably relieved I wasn't causing drama about the succession decision. 2 months after I'd left the family company, I got the call I'd been waiting for. She reached out through a mutual contact first, asking if we could meet for coffee. I'd expected her to contact me eventually, but I didn't anticipate it would be this soon or through such channels. I agreed to the meeting, curious about what she wanted to discuss. She was exactly as I remembered from 5 years ago, sharp, professional, intimidating in the way that truly competent people often are. She'd been our family company's largest client back then, representing a massive manufacturing conglomerate that accounted for nearly 25% of our annual revenue. She was also the client my cousin had managed to offend and lose within her first month as owner. We met at a small cafe downtown. She got straight to the point. She told me she'd heard about my new venture and wanted to know if I was taking on new clients. I told her I was, but that my capacity was currently limited as we were still growing. She smiled at that and said she wasn't looking for full capacity. She was looking for the same quality and reliability she'd gotten for years before the ownership change at my family's company. I asked her what had happened. She didn't hold back. My cousin had decided that their contract terms were outdated and needed restructuring to reflect current market realities, which translated to higher prices for the same service. When she'd pushed back, my cousin had suggested that perhaps they should explore other suppliers if they weren't willing to adapt to new business models. So she had. She'd tried 2 other suppliers over the past 6 weeks. Both had been disasters. Quality issues, missed deadlines, poor communication. She was weeks behind on deliveries to her own clients and bleeding money on expedited shipping to make up for it. She needed someone who understood her needs and could deliver consistently. I told her I could help, but I'd need to bring on additional staff and equipment to handle her volume. She asked how much and how quickly. I gave her numbers. She didn't blink. She told me to make it happen, that she'd cover the startup costs as an advance against future orders if needed. We shook hands, and I walked out of that cafe with a contract that would triple my company's revenue overnight. The next week was chaos. I was hiring, training, securing equipment, setting up new production lines. My original 3 employees became 15, then 20. We moved to a larger facility. The work was brutal, but it felt right in a way nothing had felt in years. This was mine. We were building it with our own hands, our own expertise, our own relationships. My parents called during this time, asking if I wanted to come to a family dinner. They were having my cousin over to celebrate her first quarter running the company. I almost declined, but then an idea formed. I told them I'd love to come and asked if I could bring a guest. My mother sounded delighted. She asked if I was seeing someone. I told her it was someone important to me, someone I'd been working with closely. She took that to mean a romantic partner and got even more excited. I didn't correct her. The dinner was set for the following Saturday. I called my new client and explained the situation, or at least part of it. I told her about my family's company, about my cousin taking over, about the dinner invitation. I asked if she'd be willing to attend as my guest, acknowledging it might be awkward but assuring her it would be worth her time. She laughed and told me she wouldn't miss it for anything. Saturday arrived. I picked her up in my car, and we drove to my parents' house together. She was dressed impeccably in a business casual outfit that somehow managed to be both appropriate for a family dinner and intimidating in its professionalism. We talked strategy on the drive over. She wanted to follow my lead, but wasn't going to pretend she didn't know my cousin if it came up. My parents' home sat on a quiet street lined with old trees, the kind of house that suggested stability and old money without being ostentatious. I'd grown up there, spent countless dinners at that table, Learned my work ethic from watching my father come home exhausted every night and still make time for family. We walked up to the door, and my mother answered with her usual warmth. She hugged me and then turned to my guest with an expectant smile, clearly anticipating an introduction to her son's new girlfriend. I introduced them by name and title, making it clear this was a business associate. My mother's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly and welcomed us both inside. My father was in the living room, pouring drinks. My cousin stood near the fireplace, wine glass in hand, talking animatedly about some marketing campaign she was planning. She looked up when we entered, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then pure horror in the span of about 3 seconds. The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. Red wine spread across the floor like blood, and for a moment, everyone just stared. Then my mother rushed to get towels, my father started asking if anyone was hurt, and my cousin just stood there, frozen, staring at my guest. My guest smiled politely and greeted my cousin by name, asking how she was doing. My cousin managed to stammer out something that might have been a greeting. I could see her mind working, trying to figure out what this meant, why her former largest client was here at a family dinner as my guest. We sat down for dinner after the mess was cleaned up. The conversation was stilted, awkward in a way family dinners had never been before. My parents kept trying to fill the silence with questions about my guest's work, about how we'd met, about what I'd been doing for the past 2 months. I answered honestly. I told them I'd started my own manufacturing company, that my guest was my largest client, that business was going well enough that I'd had to expand facilities and triple my staff in the past month. My father's expression shifted from confused to calculating. He asked which company I'd started. I told him the name. I watched him process it, watched the moment he connected the dots between my new company's name and the clients my cousin had been complaining about losing. My cousin had gone pale. She asked my guest directly why she'd left their contract. My guest didn't sugarcoat it. She explained that the combination of price increases and decreased service quality had made it impossible to continue the relationship, that she'd tried other suppliers, but ultimately needed someone who understood her needs and could deliver reliably. She'd found that with my company. My mother looked between my cousin and me, clearly trying to understand what was happening. She asked if I'd deliberately poached clients from the family business. I told her I hadn't poached anyone. I'd simply made myself available, and longtime clients had chosen to follow. There was a difference. My father asked how many clients I'd taken. I told him about 40% of the major accounts, plus another 20% that had followed my senior staff members. I didn't mention the additional 15% that had reached out since then, or the fact that my cousin's mismanagement was actively driving more business my way every week. The dinner table was silent except for the clink of silverware on plates. Finally, my father asked why I'd done this. I looked at him directly and told him he'd answered that question himself 2 months ago. He'd told me my cousin deserved the company more, that I'd understand eventually. Well, I understood now. I understood that loyalty and hard work meant nothing compared to whatever equation they'd use to make their decision. I understood that I couldn't rely on family to value my contributions. So I'd built something new where my work would be valued by clients, by staff, by the market. My mother started to cry. She told me they'd never meant to hurt me, that they'd thought I was resilient enough to handle the disappointment, that they believed giving me the company would be unfair to my cousin who'd worked so hard. I almost laughed at that. My cousin had worked 3 years in marketing while I'd spent a decade learning every aspect of the business, but somehow that equation made sense to them. My cousin found her voice finally. She accused me of sabotaging her, of deliberately undermining the company, of being vindictive and petty. I let her finish her tirade, then asked her a simple question. I asked if she'd reviewed the client feedback reports from the past 2 months, the ones that detailed exactly why they were leaving. She went quiet. I pulled out my phone and read some of the feedback aloud. Clients citing poor communication, dismissive treatment, price increases without value justification, missed deadlines, quality issues. None of it was sabotage. It was just the natural consequence of someone running a business without understanding how it actually worked. My father asked what I wanted. I told him I didn't want anything from them. I'd built my own company, secured my own clients, created my own success. I'd come to dinner because they'd invited me, and I'd brought my guest because I thought they deserved to see what I'd accomplished without their help. But I didn't need anything from them anymore. My guest added that she was impressed by what I'd built and looked forward to continuing our partnership. She mentioned that several other companies in her network were looking for reliable suppliers, and she'd been recommending my company. That was news to me, and I felt a surge of gratitude toward her for backing me up so publicly. We finished dinner in near silence. My mother tried to make small talk, but it felt hollow. My cousin left early, claiming she had work to catch up on. My father walked me to the door afterward and told me he was disappointed in how I'd handled this. I told him the feeling was mutual and left. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My cousin called me the next morning, screaming about how I'd humiliated her in front of our parents. I let her vent, then calmly pointed out that I'd simply told the truth about my business. If she felt humiliated, perhaps she should examine why the truth was so damaging to her. She threatened legal action, claiming I'd stolen trade secrets and clients. I reminded her that I'd resigned properly, hadn't taken any proprietary information, and had simply leveraged my own relationships. Clients chose to leave because of her management, not because of my interference. She hung up on me. My father called that afternoon. He was more measured than my cousin, but equally upset. He told me I'd damaged the family business deliberately, that I'd put revenge ahead of family loyalty. I asked him where family loyalty had been when they decided to hand the company to someone with 3 years of experience over someone with 10. He didn't have an answer for that. My mother called that evening. She was still crying. She told me she'd never realized how hurt I was, that they genuinely believed I'd be fine with the decision. She asked if there was any way to repair our relationship. I told her I didn't know, that I needed time to process everything. She accepted that, though I could hear the pain in her voice. The business impact on the family company became clearer over the following weeks. My cousin lost another 15% of major clients, not to me, but to other competitors who smelled blood in the water. Word spreads fast in the industry when a company is struggling, and my family's business had built its reputation over 30 years. Watching it crumble under my cousin's leadership in less than 6 months was almost surreal. My own company continued to grow. The referrals from my major client brought in 3 more significant contracts. I hired another dozen employees, moved to an even larger facility, and started looking into expanding our service offerings. Every success felt like vindication, proof that I'd been right to strike out on my own. But it also felt hollow sometimes. I'd catch myself wanting to call my father to tell him about landing a new contract, or wanting to ask my mother's advice on hiring decisions. The anger was still there, burning steady, but underneath it was grief for what we'd lost. Update 2. 6 months after the dinner, my cousin reached out again. This time she wasn't angry. She was desperate. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no, but curiosity won out. She looked exhausted when I saw her. She'd lost weight, had dark circles under her eyes. She told me the company was hemorrhaging money. They were down to 40% of their original client base, had laid off a third of the staff, and were struggling to make payroll. My parents had come out of retirement to try to help stabilize things, but it wasn't working. She asked if I'd consider coming back. I told her no. She broke down then, admitting she was in over her head, that she'd never understood how complex the business actually was. She'd thought marketing expertise would be enough, that the operational side would just run itself. She'd been wrong about everything. I asked her why my parents had chosen her. She looked away, uncomfortable. Finally, she admitted that she'd convinced them she deserved it. She'd spent months building a case that I was too rigid, too focused on maintaining old relationships instead of pursuing growth, too risk-averse to take the company to the next level. She'd pitched herself as the innovative future while painting me as the stagnant past. My parents had believed her. I sat there, absorbing this. All those years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of building the business, undermined by a marketing pitch. I asked her if she understood what she'd destroyed. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. She told me she was sorry, that she'd been arrogant and stupid, that she'd ruined everything. I told her she had, and that I couldn't fix it for her. This was her consequence to live with. I paid for my coffee and left. Update 3. A year after the initial dinner, the family company declared bankruptcy. My parents lost most of their retirement savings trying to keep it afloat. My cousin moved to another state, unable to find work in the industry after word spread about what had happened. My mother called me the day after the bankruptcy was finalized. She asked if I felt satisfied now that I'd destroyed the family business. I told her I hadn't destroyed anything, I'd simply removed myself from a situation where I wasn't valued. They destroyed it themselves through their choices. She told me I was heartless. I told her she was probably right, that having your life's work dismissed as less valuable than someone's marketing presentation tends to harden a person. She hung up on me. My father called a week later. He didn't apologize, but he acknowledged that they'd made a mistake in judgment. He asked if I could find it in myself to help them financially, just until they got back on their feet. I told him I'd think about it. I did think about it. For weeks, I turned it over in my mind. Part of me wanted to help, wanted to be the bigger person, wanted to rebuild some kind of relationship with my parents. But another part of me remembered standing in that study, watching them sign away everything I'd worked for, hearing that my cousin deserved it more. In the end, I compromised. I hired my father as a consultant for my company, not out of charity, but because he actually did have valuable knowledge and experience. I paid him market rate, treated him like any other employee, and made it clear this was a professional arrangement. He accepted, though I could see the pride it cost him. My mother and I don't talk much anymore. She never forgave me for what she sees as my betrayal of the family. I never forgave her for choosing someone else over me. Maybe someday we'll find a way past that, but I'm not holding my breath. My company now employs over 70 people and generates more annual revenue than the family business did at its peak. I've built something I'm proud of, something that's entirely mine. The success is satisfying, but it doesn't erase the hurt of what came before. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they'd just given me the company like I'd expected. Would I have grown it the way I've grown my own venture? Would I have pushed myself as hard? There's no way to know. What I do know is that I learned something valuable from all of this. Family loyalty only matters when it runs both ways. Respect has to be earned and maintained, not assumed. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so successful that everyone can see exactly what they gave away. I still think about that dinner sometimes, about the look on my cousin's face when she dropped that wine glass. I'd be lying if I said it didn't bring me some satisfaction. But mostly, I remember the moment I decided to smile and back off, to accept their decision without argument. That was the moment I took control of my own destiny, even if they didn't realize it. They wanted me to understand why my cousin deserved the company more. I understand now. She deserved it because she wanted it, and she was willing to manipulate and politic to get it. I deserved what I actually built. A company based on real relationships, genuine expertise, and earned trust. I'm not sure either of us got what we actually deserved, but we both got what we chose. She chose shortcuts and suffered the consequences. I chose the hard way and reaped the rewards. My phone still has my parents' numbers saved. I haven't deleted them, but I rarely call. Maybe that will change someday. Maybe time will soften some of these sharp edges. But for now, I'm focused on building my future rather than trying to repair my past. The family business is gone. The family relationships are fractured beyond easy repair. But I'm still here, still growing, still proving every day that I was worth betting on. They'll understand eventually. Or they won't. Either way, I've moved on. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.